Absolute beings who had created countless universes since time immemorial in search of infinity, these beings possessed a power beyond any limits of imagination, and their desire for knowledge was inexhaustible. The absolute being kept on creating more and more creations, and so laws, souls, and various matter were born, but nothing could dispel the boredom of the absolute. He began to watch the warfare of the creatures he created, studying their conflicts and intrigues. In every battle, in every clash, he sought answers to the questions that had troubled his mind since he began to create universes. He was also interested in the destructive power of these creatures. The creatures had to fight, die, and be reborn again in an endless war, and it was all to amuse his creator. This was the case until the unforeseen happened. An absolute being watching the battle was destroyed by his own creation. Absolute beings from other dimensions, upon learning of this, gathered together, turning their gaze to the world that had lost its creator. The death of their kind by a creature born of his hands is a dark omen. In these shadows, echoes of past evil, lies the true power of created beings. However, this fact did not excite the absolute beings. They only had one thought: the power that lost its owner would belong to the one who would be the first to take it away. The young boy Suho said that he had been accepted into the Korean National Institute of Arts. He still couldn't believe it. His friends couldn't believe that he was telling them the truth. They thought it couldn't be. Their facial expressions changed a lot. They didn't want to believe it. They doubted that such a rude person could pass the Art Institute entrance exam. One of them cried and said that he should have retaken the exam. Suho laughed with them and said that he finally had freedom from this hell. But suddenly he heard someone behind his back congratulate him on passing the entrance exam and asked if he got into the Art Institute. He turned around to see who it was. Suho saw that it was Kim Sung-chul who approached him again. Kim Sung-chul said that he didn't think he had a talent for it. He was wondering since when did he become good at drawing. But the guy got mad at him. He told him that his name wasn't Kim Sung-chul, but Lee Yun-chul. But Suho didn't care that he was mad at him. He pretended that he didn't mix up his name on purpose. He said that thanks to Suho, his plan to go to a high school failed. Suho replied that thanks to him he was able to graduate. The other students noticed that Yun-chul was provoking him again. They realized that it wouldn't be long before they would have graduation, yet he continued to act like a child, ignoring the maturity and responsibility that was already required of him at this important moment. The students couldn't understand why Yun-chul was picking on a man who was trying his best to live a happy life after his parents disappeared. Lee Yun-chul wanted to hit him. He shouted his name loudly and started to attack him, but Suho stood still. He was completely calm and sure he could repel his attack. Suho reacted incredibly fast to his attack, striking him back, which made Lee Yun-chul fall to the floor. Leaving, Suho told him to be quiet until graduation. But suddenly, Lee Yun-chul stood up, determined and ready to continue the fight. His eyes blazed with determination, and he made it clear that he had not given up yet despite the difficulties. He told Suho that he was not hurt at all. His hand was covered with an unknown energy that Suho saw for the first time. This power seemed mysterious and unfamiliar to him. Lee Yun-chul unleashed an incredibly powerful attack that Suho was miraculously able to dodge thanks to his reflexes. His face reflected fear and surprise, while the other disciples were also shocked by Lee Yun-chul's strength. The force of his punch was tremendous. It pierced through the nearby iron lockers. Suho, who was lying on the floor, was in a complete daze and couldn't do anything, completely paralyzed from terror and shock. Lee Yun-chul's entire body was shrouded in a brightly glowing aura that emanated from him with incredible power. He looked truly formidable and powerful, capable of crushing any obstacle in his way. 2 years had passed since that incident. Suho was already a second-year university student. Walking down the street, immersed in his thoughts, he often remembered that day. He heard a man telling the passers-by that all the classes in the main building had been moved to the neighboring building and asked all the students to go there. Suho thought that the hunters were currently conducting a gate sweep and noticed the guards telling everyone to stay away from the danger zone. One of them asked how long it had been since the hunters had arrived. The staff member replied that it had been a little over an hour, considering the gate was rated as D-ranked. They should have arrived soon. Suho heard an announcement stating that only hunters could approach the gate. He thought that there was a new gate again, given the increased precautions and strict restriction on access. He remembered that 3 years ago, strange gates had started appearing all over the world, and since then things had changed. Their former world no longer existed. The gates worked as doors leading to a dungeon, from which demonic beasts would emerge after a time, destroying everything in their path. But at the same time with these, changes occurred in the people themselves. There were people able to control magical energy. Such people were called awakened. In their rapidly changing world, the chaos, which felt like it should have lasted for a long time, ended much sooner. An awakened man named Jin Chul created an association of hunters, gathering all his kind together, and founded the specialty of hunters. Thus now all people were divided into 2 groups. There were the awakened, and there were the ordinary people who couldn't awaken. While some had to break through obstacles like ants, others had it fall straight from the sky into their hands. In this system, the ants were clearly aware of their boundaries. Suho realized that no matter how hard an ordinary person tried, he was no match for even an awakened E-rank hunter. But if the hunter didn't close the gate, this world would be destroyed. In other words, people couldn't survive without the awakened ones, but the hunters could manage without the ordinary people. Suho was grateful to the hunters for this, that the unawakened like him could live peacefully, and yet he felt anxious whether he could get used to what he couldn't have. It all started from his parents missing, to depending on others for his right to survive. It all went against what he once could have gotten. He lost what he had, and the resulting void was filled with helplessness. He remembered that his mother often told him that he had taken after his father. He wondered how his father would have acted in his situation, and suddenly he heard someone calling him. His memories were interrupted by his teacher, who came up to him to tell him that he had had a pretty good concentration today. He looked at his drawing and asked if it was interesting to draw like that. Suho replied that he just did it without thinking, to which the teacher replied that his ant was quite ingenious for an insect. But looking closer, he said that it was not just an ant, but a human ant. Suho looked at his painting and could not understand why he had drawn it in the first place. All of the staff who were fencing the gate saw that the hunters were coming back, and everyone had to get ready to meet them. The people gathered around the gate noticed that the atmosphere around them was relaxed, which meant that their raid was a success. One of the staff members thanked Hunter Kim Jong-soo for their work, to which he replied that the dungeon had been successfully cleared, and he had information to pass on to the association. He said that they had found a new species of demonic beasts. They were humanoid-like creatures that spewed blue flames from their eyes and mouths. They used claws and fangs, but their killing power was low. The hunter said that he was a little hurt, but since no complications had been revealed, they were just harmless monsters, and yet they definitely hadn't met such demonic beasts before, so he was glad that they weren't dangerous. When he told them about the new beasts, the staff asked him to detail everything in the association report. Suddenly, blue flames appeared from the hunter's wound, and the hunter felt a sharp pain. He let go of his sword and hands. It was as if an unknown force enveloped him. He lowered his head and froze. The staff member noticed that his eyes were sparkling with blue flames. He called out to him, but there was no response from him. Before the employee could speak, the hunter turned around and attacked him. He was under the power of the blue flame and could not resist it. It destroyed the employee standing next to him. The hunters who were walking behind him were shocked that their leader had destroyed a man who posed no threat to him. They realized that the flames in this dungeon were not ordinary. It had infected the hunter, after which he could infect anyone he would bite. The people panicked and began to retreat from the gate, terrified that the hunter had just destroyed a human. They feared that he might turn against them, and quickly searched for a safe place. An unexpected noise outside interrupted the drawing class, and the students went to the windows to see why people were shouting. Suho raised his head and couldn't understand what was happening there. Looking through the window, the students couldn't understand why people started attacking each other. They were all enveloped in a blue flame that was driving them crazy. They noticed that their eyes were glowing blue, which meant that it was definitely demonic energy, They thought that the dungeon had not been cleaned up. The people outside didn't know what to do. Some were trying to find a safe place and stay away from the blue flame-possessed people. Others were shouting that they should have waited for the hunters who could save them. One of the students told Professor Lim that he was also an awakened one and asked him to do something, to which the professor replied that he couldn't help. He was only an E-rank hunter. Suho noticed that one of the hunters, engulfed in blue flames, was heading straight towards them. He managed to warn everyone to run away from the windows quickly and find a safe place. After his words, the hunter's body burst into the classroom window and began to destroy all the people present in the classroom. Suho turned around and began to run away, shouting for everyone else to do the same. Suho, while running away, noticed that one student was lying on the floor crying in pain. She couldn't escape from the classroom. Her legs were injured. She was begging to be helped to get out and escape. He didn't know what to do and how he would be able to help the girl. He turned around and rushed to run further. He shouted to her that he ran for help and would definitely come back for her, but already with the hunters. Suho ran and could not understand who he could call for help. He thought that he had left the girl to her doom, but he realized that as an unawakened man, he could only do one thing. He closed his eyes and thought that it was all because of that stupid awakening, but if he only blamed the situation, nothing would change. He realized that it was up to him to find a way out of the situation. Suho closed his eyes and thought about what his father would have done in his place. He turned around and saw the possessed hunter already approaching the girl. The girl was screaming and calling for help, but there was no one around her. She saw that she was being attacked by the hunter. She covered her face with her hands and started screaming loudly. Suho came to her rescue, and with the help of a fire extinguisher, he was able to repel the hunter's attack, saved her from imminent death. Suho knew that in his place, his father would have done the same thing. He would not leave the girl in trouble and would have saved her. Then Suho received a notice that he had fulfilled all the conditions of the secret quest courage of the powerless. He remembered that once he had a dream, he remembered it clearly, as if it was really happening to him. Suho thought that in this dream, it was as if he was in some game where he had power attack gloves in which he fought against monsters. In order to defeat the monsters that were getting stronger each time, Suho had to find new ways and methods to be able to resist these increasing threats. To prevent the monsters from killing him, he raised his level as much as possible and fought endlessly with the monsters. With each new destruction of his level increased, and he became stronger and stronger. Suho realized that the stronger the monsters became, the stronger he became, and soon he came across only powerful monsters. He used all his skills and all his weapons to fight the strong monsters. Time passed, and he managed to get to the last level where the strongest monster was waiting for him to fight. Suho remembered that the boss he met there was very strong, although he was his enemy, but his power caused him respect and even envy. Well, for some reason the boss was a character he wanted to wake up to, he couldn't and didn't want to fight him, and he couldn't wake up either. The main boss in the last level was his father. When he saw him, he realized that he would not be able to destroy him. He thought that maybe he was just a projection of his dream, strong and unflappable father. He wondered how he friend gained such strength. Suho took the fire extinguisher to save the girl from the mad hunter. He kept thinking about his father. He wondered what he would do in such a situation. He ran at the monster and thought that if his father was in this abnormal situation, how would he deal with the hunter who wanted to destroy them? The hunter's entire body was engulfed in a blue flame that completely took over him. He went mad and went to infect other people, turning them into similar monsters. Suho fought the hunter as best he could. He hit him with a fire extinguisher, preventing him from biting everyone in the class. He was sure that his father would have done the same thing. He would have sacrificed himself to save an innocent man, so he decided to do the same. He managed to fend off the attack of an incredibly strong hunter. He realized that they should have found a safe place now. He realized that it wouldn't last long, and he didn't know what to do now. He had heard that the unawakened couldn't hurt monsters without magic. Suho realized that he had been too reckless in running to save the girl. He hadn't thought of the consequences, and now his life was in danger. He had no magic, and he wouldn't be able to stop the monster. He noticed one strange thing. The monster didn't fall down. It was like it was suspended in the air. Suho couldn't understand what kind of magic it was. Who possessed such power? Suho looked at the girl, who also froze and did not move. Everything around him froze. He could not understand what was happening. He received a notice that had not been opened yet. He was shocked that time had stopped around him. His thoughts were running through his head one after another. He opened the notification and read that he had successfully completed the secret quest, The Courage of a Weakling, and the system was offering him to become a player. Suddenly he realized that this was just like his dream, where he had to fight his father in the final fight. He thought that if it was really like his dream, he couldn't refuse such an offer to become a player. Suho smiled and confirmed that he would like to become a player. Now his life would change. He didn't know what was ahead of him, but he was ready to accept the change. The system congratulated him for becoming a player. He was rewarded for completing the task. The mage Candiaru granted him a powerful spell, and from now on he would always be in good health. He also received the enhancement of long life without disease. He was immune to all diseases, poisons, and other negative effects. The system warned him that this was not a dream, and to be careful, he only had one life. Looking at his stats, Suho thought that this window was just like in the game. It was just like in his dream, and he was happy about that. The system notified him that he had a new mission. He needed to destroy the fog burn and increase his level. Burn of Mist was an awakened hunter who was infected in the blue flame after a failed attempt to clear the gate. Suho, after receiving all the notifications, noticed that the time had unfrozen. He looked at the girl and told her to run away from here soon. Now he could see all the inscriptions above the heads of the hunters. They were all mist burns that he needed to destroy. They were simple, unawakened people. He saw two unawakened demonic beings and one hunter in front of him. He realized that he needed to defeat them to level up. Suho saw two fog burns running at him, ready to destroy him. The surviving humans were fleeing to safety. He stood calmly and waited for them to approach. He knew that if he really awakened, he now possessed magic that was capable of destroying the monsters, so he decided to test it. Suho took the fire extinguisher and hit the first monster that tried to attack him. This blow knocked the monster back a few meters. He threw the fire extinguisher away and now decided to test the power of his punch. He swung and aimed his fist straight at the monster's head. Suho was incredibly focused and angry. He gathered all his strength and shouted for the monster to feel the full force of his attack. His determination and rage were palpable, and for the first time he was not afraid of them. The power of his strike increased several times. Now he was an extraordinary unawakened man. He struck the monster, and it pierced the ceiling with him. Suho couldn't believe that he had such power. He was easily able to defeat the monster who had previously been able to destroy him with a single blow. The system notified him that he was able to defeat Burn Mist unawakened. He looked at his fist and couldn't believe that he was able to do it with just one blow. The monster saw that he was standing still and decided to attack him, but Suho was able to dodge and counterattack him, which destroyed the monster. The system confirmed that he was able to defeat the second monster, and his mission was complete. He was incredibly happy that he had such abilities. Suho was able to level up. He had successfully completed the training where he had to destroy the fog burn and level up. The system gave him a reward for completing the task. He couldn't think that this was actually happening to him. He decided to test his new powers. He attacked the monster and finally realized that he had really awakened. He now had abilities and could wield magic. Suho struck, but this time it was different. The monster took his blow as if it didn't feel any pain. This surprised Suho and made him realize that the upcoming battle would be much more difficult than he thought. He was quite astonished that he was unable to destroy the monster. He realized that his opponent had become much stronger than he had expected. This caused him to not only be surprised, but also anxious, causing him to look for new ways to defeat it. The monster launched its attack right after Suho failed to destroy it with each passing moment. The attack became more and more fierce, and Suho realized that he now had to endure a veritable storm of power and fury to survive and find a way to defeat this invulnerable enemy. Mist Burn had severely wounded Suho in one of his attacks. Feeling the sharp pain, Suho realized that he was in big trouble. The situation had become critical, and he realized that he had to change his strategy to survive and continue the fight. Suho gathered his strength and kicked the monster, which allowed him to break free and jump back to a safe distance. Once at a distance, he took a deep breath. Realizing that this temporary escape gave him pause to think about his next move. He saw the heavy wounds on himself and thought that now he could turn into a demonic creature. After such an injury, it scared him because he had only just been able to awaken. The system notified him that they had detected life-threatening injuries, and now the effect of long life without sickness had been activated. He couldn't figure out what the skill was, but then he remembered that the ability was in one of the notifications. He had gotten it as a reward for killing monsters. The monster pounced on him and knocked him to the ground, trying to inflict maximum damage. It was incredibly strong, and Suho could hardly contain it. He thought that since he was weaker than a D-rank demonic creature, it meant that his rank was E. He was glad that he was able to awaken, but didn't understand why he had such a low rank. Suho tried his best to restrain the monster and prevent it from biting him. He didn't know how to defeat it, but he didn't give up. Suho realized that any action he took could be decisive in this deadly battle. Suddenly, Suho received a reward notification. He was given skill points and strength points. The enhanced abilities gave him a chance to win the battle with the monster. After receiving the reward, Suho was able to strike the monster and release his hand from its death grip. He became stronger, and now he could overpower this monster. He was able to throw the monster off of him by throwing it off of him to the floor. He had to get up and counterattack to finish off the monster before it could get back on its feet again. The monster quickly got up, and their deadly duel continued. Suho didn't know what the monster would do, but he realized that he needed to urgently destroy it before it inflicted a fatal wound on him. Suho started to attack it and gave it a heavy and powerful blow. This attack was so strong that the monster recoiled. Clearly stunned by the power of the blow, he continued to pursue his target, leaving the monster no chance. But the monster took all the blows and still tried to destroy Suho, who couldn't believe that the monster was able to attack him back after receiving such heavy blows. Suho thought that even with such strength, he couldn't overpower the monster. He decided that the skill points given to him, he would have to invest in strength. He invested the skill points, and his strength increased. He thought that this would be enough to defeat the monster, who was an incredibly powerful opponent. Suho thought that an awakened who had increased his level, he had never heard of such a thing before. The rank of an awakened was determined upon awakening, and it was impossible to overcome this rank. He dodged the monster's attack and prepared to attack it. He didn't know that he determined the ranks of the unawakened as well, but that was the least of his worries right now. He had a dangerous monster to defeat. Suho thought that apparently he had the power to go beyond this unfair system. Feeling a new power and capability, he felt that he was now able to overcome the limitations and change the course of events in his favor. He struck another incredibly strong blow after he increased his strength. The monster flew several meters away and could only stop when it hit the wall. Suho decided that it could not be given the slightest chance. He started attacking it before it could get up, and his strikes reached their target and were much stronger than the past attacks. There was no stopping him. He delivered blow after blow, and the monster could do nothing. It did not defend itself and only took all the blows. After a series of monstrous attacks, Suho struck it in the hope that he had managed to destroy it. The tension and fatigue was making itself felt, but Suho was determined. Suho was breathing heavily. It was becoming difficult for him to continue the battle. He approached the monster's body to see if he had succeeded in destroying it. The system notified him that he had defeated the monster. He was able to increase his level by several levels. The enhanced abilities and new abilities gave him confidence, and he felt that his efforts were not in vain. Suho decided to sit down and rest. He needed to catch his breath. He was happy that the monster was finally finished. He looked at his own again, which was slightly bloody. He clenched his fist and finally realized that he had become an awakened player. Suho realized that now he would have a completely different future. Now he didn't feel like an ant. Now he was more confident and knew what he had to do next. He was sure that now he would succeed. Now that he was awakened, he could save people and deal with all the chaos that enveloped his world. The unknown hunter moved through the other monsters, towards the building where Suho was. In his hands was a heavy sword that he dragged along the ground. As the hunter approached the building, he jumped incredibly high. In the air, his movements were swift and graceful. His goal was clear, and he aimed to reach it with maximum precision and speed. Suho went to the window to see what was happening outside, but suddenly he noticed that a swift attack was launched at him. He saw the fog burn was already nearby, drawing his sword to attack. Suho, in a slight daze, didn't know what to do. He had to find a way to avoid being hit and work out a plan of action to avoid falling victim to the swift attack. He was attacked by an incredibly strong monster. It was a Mistburn awakened. It was C rank, and stopping it would be quite difficult considering Suho's own rank. Burn Mist launched an attack that sent piles of rocks flying down. The debris piled up all around, creating clouds of dust and chaos. Suho needed to quickly orient himself to avoid the effects of the attack and find a way to continue fighting. Throughout the city, an announcement was sounded to the residents that was very important, and it came from all corners of the city and was repeated more than once. There was an escape from an underground prison in the Korean University district. Residents in the surrounding areas were to evacuate immediately. The soldiers stood on one of the rooftops and watched what was happening below. They were not supposed to interfere with what was happening and waited for the proper order. They were upset that the people below were dying and they were supposed to just stand by and watch it, the commander asked when the hunters from the association would arrive. His subordinate replied that they needed time to allocate them B-rank hunters, but the other soldier was surprised by his answer. He thought a D rank was needed here. He replied that the Hunters Association assumed that hunters in the area could have encountered serious harm. Looking over the list of infected hunters on his tablet, the soldier saw a familiar face and couldn't believe that he was also infected. He couldn't believe that even C-rank hunters could be infected given their level of training and defense. Suho saw the dangerous Mistburner in front of him who had jumped onto his floor. He was holding his sword and was about to attack him. He looked at him and thought that he had only frightened him with his attack. He couldn't believe that he had come running to him from the lowest floors. In front of him was a S-rang awakened by the fog. Suho realized that judging from the fact that it came to him with weapons, it was different from other monsters. But Suho was confident in his strength since he had recently managed to raise his level. He had no doubt that he would be able to fight him for life. The monster launched its attack and tried to damage him with its weapon, but Suho managed to dodge the swift attack in time. Suho, after dodging the attack, felt his heart beat faster with excitement. He quickly recovered, trying not to lose concentration, and prepared for the next step to respond to the attack. The monster did not launch another attack, leaving Suho in the dark. This temporary lull only increased his tension, and he tensely waited to see what would happen next, preparing for the monster's possible attack. Suho thought that he was a psychopath. His cruelty and unpredictability made him feel uneasy. Suho realized that he was facing an enemy whose motives and habits were difficult to understand, making him even more dangerous in this intense battle. The monster once again drew his sword, intending to attack Suho, who was standing near the wall. He was incredibly strong and vicious. He was ready to destroy anyone who would stand in his way. As soon as the monster made its attack, Suho threw a fire extinguisher at it, which the monster chopped in half, and its contents filled the entire room. The entire room was shrouded in a thick fog that was formed after the recent attack. It made it difficult to see. Suho, in the midst of this darkness, felt the tension building up and knew that any move he made could be decisive in such conditions. He decided to take advantage of the situation and escape from the room while he had the chance. He decided that the monster was too strong to continue fighting him. Suho thought that it was too much to have such a monster. There was a reason why his awakening level was divided. He realized that he needed to hold out until the other hunters came. He tried his best to leave the building, but there was already a monster behind him who saw where he was headed. Suho was not going to stop and continued to run. The monster was smiling sinisterly. His eyes were burning with an eerie, evil light. His confidence and hatred were evident, and his every movement radiated menace. Suho realized that now he was going to face even more danger, and his every action must be carefully calibrated. He turned around and saw that he was being chased by the monster. As he ran past the window, the monster suddenly stopped and looked through it. He saw 3 people on the roof who stood quietly unsuspecting and didn't even see him. On the roof were three frightened girls who were sure that they had to wait here until the hunters came, but they did not know if they would come to save them. The monster decided to change his target and started to attack the three girls who couldn't resist him or escape from him. He was about to give them a fatal blow. Suho stopped and saw that the monster was no longer chasing him. He also saw that he had jumped out the window, and he realized that he was now attacking someone else. The monster did not manage to hit the girls with his sword, who started to run away in panic, their frightened screams spreading throughout the city. Suho heard the screams and became incredibly angry. He realized that he had to find a way to resist the strong monster, not flee. He ran and jumped after the monster. He thought that he did not have time to wait for the hunter. The monster did not stop at anything, and only he could save the girls. The monster didn't notice Suho jumping out after him, and was stunned when Suho suddenly attacked him from the back. Suho took the moment to strengthen his position and prepare for the next step in the battle. Suho was determined. He realized that he had to stop this monster before it destroyed most of the people. His attack only angered the monster, who, as if he didn't feel the strong blow, turned around and attacked him with his sword. Suho barely had time to dodge the sword attack. Feeling the blade swept within centimeters of him, his reflexes went into overdrive, and breathing heavily, he quickly assessed the situation to make his next attack. He was at a safe distance from the monster, thinking that if the monster hit even once, it would be enough to kill him. Suho looked around and saw that the monster was able to destroy a few of the girls standing on the roof of the house, and thought that it was necessary to avenge them. He realized that now he couldn't let it leave quietly. He had to stop it here without letting it kill more people. Suho began to give him a huge amount of body blows in hopes that it would slow him down and he would be able to give him a decisive blow. He continued to beat it with his bare hands. He kept hitting it harder and harder, but the monster still stood on its feet. Suho realized that it would take more strength to break this stubborn monster. Once Suho's strikes began to slow down, the monster decided to seize the moment and struck him with a sword that was able to wound Suho. Suho was in incredible pain from the wound, so the monster decided to finish him off and gave him a physical attack that sent Suho flying straight into the wall. The monster approached him to deliver a decisive blow and destroy him while he sat on the ground unable to recover. Suho saw that his health level was low. He felt that death was near. He would not be able to continue the fight. He thought that he had lost this fight. But he kept thinking that he was lucky that he didn't die immediately. He thought that the system didn't want him to fall at the hands of the monster yet. The monster suddenly began to laugh evilly. He realized that he had already been able to defeat Suho, and this realization gave him even more evil confidence, making him an even more dangerous opponent. Suddenly, Suho felt a strange tingling sensation inside him. This sensation was unusual and seemed to penetrate him to the core. He realized that something had changed in his body. He raised his hands and thought that these new sensations could be related to his abilities or unexpected powers that he had not yet fully realized. These sensations intensified more and more, leaving Suho stunned. Each tingling sensation was like an electric shock. It took over his mind and body, causing mixed feelings of fear and curiosity. Suho was immersed in this inexplicable state, trying to understand what was happening and how it could affect his future actions in battle. But the monster was already close and attacked him. The system notified him that his level of fatigue was. He slowly began to lose consciousness. He could no longer defend himself and continue the fight with the monster. Suho thought to beg for mercy as the monster approached him to destroy him. The roof of the house suddenly began to crack, and after a moment was destroyed. An unknown monster destroyed the roof. Suho could not understand what kind of creature it was, but he was sure that it had appeared in time, thus saving his life. Suho and the monster collapsed down from the roof. Suho had no strength to stop his fall and was rapidly approaching the ground. He realized that he could not avoid the impact. He fell to the ground with all his might. Punching the ground with him, the huge impact created cracks and knocked out pieces of earth. The monster also couldn't avoid falling. Suho, immersed in the darkness and dust, felt his strength draining. He was already bleeding to death. He thought that he was saved by an ant. Before waking up, he was an ordinary man who often drew them. It was him that Suho thought of at the threshold of death. The ant confirmed that he was the one who saved him. He apologized for arriving too late. Now he would not let the monster destroy him. He looked at the monster that had crippled Suho and brought him to the brink of death and was ready to avenge him. He realized that the monster was too weak for him. The ant was extremely angry at the monster. He thought they were insects that had ruined the health of a noble man like Suho. He was able to easily destroy the monster with one deadly attack, after which the monster shattered into small pieces. The monsters walked around the institute looking for new prey to destroy and infect them with blue flames so that they would continue to create the same monsters. One of the monsters saw a living man who was standing with a mop in his hands. Unsuspecting, he was immersed in his thoughts and did not realize the approaching threat. Seeing the monster, the man was frightened and froze on the spot. His face turned pale with horror, and he could not understand who or what it was. So monstrous, panic seized him, and he frantically tried to think how to save himself, but fear paralyzed his actions. He threw the mop and started to call for help. Grabbing his head with his hands, he lowered his head down and didn't see that the monster attacking him had been destroyed. Well, at that moment, all the monsters were destroyed in a matter of seconds, and there was a huge echo throughout the city as BR began to emit a wave of magical energy. The soldiers who were standing nearby couldn't understand what had just happened because they felt something strange and very strong nearby. But BR immediately went back to his master Suho and told him that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and he was very happy to see his little master now, because remembering back to when he was a little boy and drawing shadow warriors in his room, and when he looked up and saw before him the mighty bear, who was holding in his clutches the drawing that Suho had drawn, and he was very surprised that his young master had drawn him. He couldn't hold back his tears because he was so touched by this beautiful creation. Now Suho began to come to his senses and opened his eyes. He couldn't understand where he was. But as soon as he opened his eyes fully, he saw that he was in bed and covered with a blanket. And the first thing he could say was, "Ant." But the doctor standing next to him couldn't understand what he had just said. A little later, he started calling his uncle, and he couldn't understand what he was saying, but it didn't matter because he just asked him how badly he was hurt, and that the world was too cruel and dangerous, and he'd hire a couple of bodyguards for him. But Suho told her he was fine. Then he started to watch on TV, and they showed the government commenting on the incident at the University of Arts. The incident, which injured many people, became a hot topic of discussion. Was the discovery of the Mistborn monster, which charges hunters and turns them into monsters. Although the incident occurred in the heart of the city, the Hunters Association was unable to react quickly. And when the hunters arrived on the scene, they saw utter chaos and destruction. But what was even more amazing was that all the monsters were destroyed, and the only question was who or what destroyed them. But some witnesses started saying that suddenly the people who had turned into monsters came out of nowhere. Suho. Watching all this, he couldn't realize that he wasn't really dreaming, because it was really real, and it wasn't just some stupid dream, and that the awakened one becomes stronger by increasing his level, because at the moment Suho is level 5. And he realized that it must be true that he got a small rank, and during a battle with a hunter who was charged, but he couldn't understand how he managed to survive. At that moment he heard a voice that said it was because Beer got rid of those parasites. And as soon as he looked down at the floor, he saw a huge shadow looking at him with its huge eyes. And as soon as Bear regained his shadow form, he said it was good to see him again after all these years as a young lord. And that as a young lord, when he has grown up and become such a wonderful person and he can't contain his feelings. But Suho slowly began to put the pieces of lost memories together. And that she knows it's the ants because as a child he loved him very much. He was one of the black creatures that had been with him in her childhood. But he couldn't understand why he could only remember it now, and Beer said that the young ruler had crossed the measurement boundary to meet him. But still, Suho couldn't understand why he had lived with these black creatures as a child, but now he was asking himself too many questions. For now, what was more important was his memories. He was bigger. But BR replied that traveling through a dimension requires a lot of mana, and came out. He was big and intimidating. But the card system indicated the level of a soldier. And as soon as BRR found out that he was down to a common soldier, he was furious. He didn't like that. He was down to a common soldier. Suho immediately got to his feet and started to say that he was feeling better and that it was really his doing, to which BR replied that it was true no matter how you looked at it, he was a great healer. And his original mission was to dispel the shadow seal, but it seems he's already broken it of his own free will, indeed his young ruler. But Suho couldn't understand what this seal had to do with him and us, but Beru began to explain that he could accept that all he had seen was what he had really lived through, and he had become much stronger since he had fought him last. And that the great Shadow Lord Seung Jin Woo had sealed his power along with his memory because he wanted him to live an ordinary life as its lord. But Suho couldn't believe his own ears because he was his father. So he's in touch with his father who left home, but Bear said he didn't leave home. He went into space. Suho couldn't understand what space was, but Beer began to explain in brief that the Shadow Adeka is in space now, fighting monsters for this world. And his father is defending their world with his own life-fighting powerful beings. More specifically, he's fighting against the powerful and the tariffs. Itarim is a creature who is trying to take over their world by sending his apostles to bat, and his father and Bear fought. But to meet him, he defeated many enemies on the way here. And the opening of the gates on Earth is also the effect of the war that is still going on right now. But Suho asked him what it means that his mother is out there too, because she disappeared on the day when he was still with his father, and he thought they were together somewhere. When he heard that, Beru got really angry because he couldn't understand. How is it possible that Mrs. Hae-in has disappeared and it's probably definitely the apostles' trickery? There's no doubt about it. Suho heard this and asked if he wanted to say that it's all the fault of the Itarim. And his parents can't come back because the Itarim interfered in their lives. But BR realized that the young lord really wanted to meet the two of them. Suho replied that of course he wanted to, and now there's only one way to get stronger to save his mother and meet his father. But BR said that because of the Dark Lord's war, he can't return to Earth, so the young lord needs to become stronger to find and rescue Hae-in himself. And now they will use this key to raise his level. And at that moment, a notification window appeared that showed that he has a new Quest Shadow test. He is the son of the Great One. Now all his innate abilities are sealed to deal with this great power. He needs to prove his qualifications and enter the Dark Dungeon and prove his abilities. And this item is the key to the Dark Dungeon. This key will allow you to travel to the Dark Dungeon. It can be used in the shadow of the Sacred Protector. BR immediately said that the young master must insert this key into his own shadow. And as soon as he did so, shadow gates began to appear in front of him. And in the shadow gate, there was a portal that he had to go through right now. BR briefly told him to go in and get back his powers that belonged to him alone. But Suho, thinking about it, couldn't quite believe that there's a cosmos, a war of the gods, a lord of shadows, and it all just doesn't make sense. But now all he has to do is gather his strength and save his mother and father, because if he can only face them when he's stronger. He decided that he would level up as much as he could just to get strong enough to fight. Bear behind him was very excited by this speech, and started to remember when his Shadow Lord told him to go to the ground and break Suho's seal. And Beer said that he was talking about the seal of the Shadow Lord, to which Seung Jin Woo said that the Itarim could invade the earth as well, and he should return his son's memory to the seal and let him protect the land. Otherwise, he should act at his discretion depending on the situation on Earth. BR finally realized that if this task was entrusted to him, he would stay by the young lord's side and help him level up. And at that moment, Suho began to enter the portal, and on the other side he slowly started to come out of it. And Beer began to explain that this is the abode of the dead, where no living person dares to enter without the master's permission. And this is the Dark Dungeon in which it is inhabited by many creatures. Suho immediately realized that it is a dungeon of shadows and looks more like a ruined city than a dungeon. But suddenly he couldn't understand why he felt uncomfortable here. But it also seemed very familiar to him, as if he had been here before. But at that moment his thoughts were shattered by the notification system, which started showing him a status window. And it said about the leadership of the task of survival in the Dungeon of Shadows will never recognize such a weakling as a master in his lands. He must hold on for the allotted time and prove his competence. Suho read the notice and realized that she had allotted him an hour. And as soon as the trial began, a creature appeared behind Suho. That didn't hesitate for a second and started to attack him in the back. Suho sensed its presence and swung around and kicked the goblin, causing it to fly off to the side. Suho realized that he had to keep his eyes open because this goblin had come out of nowhere. But when he looked closely, he saw that it wasn't just any goblin, but a scout goblin. To which Beru said that if the scout was here, there were other goblins around, and that he should deal with him before he called his friends. Suho rushed into battle, but Beru warned his young lord that of course there were goblins, but that he should not be so careless. He immediately told Suho that he didn't even have a name or color, and that this goblin was weaker than him by several times. Grabbing his hand, Suho started to squeeze his hand harder. And taking the goblin's stone axe out of his inventory, he began to attack the enemy. And in a matter of seconds, he destroyed the goblin with a single blow. Then the notification system began to show that he had destroyed the goblin scout. Suho immediately told Beru that those who are stronger than him have different colored names. But at that moment, the two of them together began to hear a strange sound. And as soon as they turned around to where the sound was coming from, they saw a goblin sitting on the roof calling out to his friends, which made Suho angry because he realized there was another scout. And just a minute later, other goblins with yellow-colored names showed up. The goblin captains also arrived after the others. And seeing all this, Suho started to ask Beru if he could help him, and he replied that he said he was willing to fight. But he was too far away from the Overlord, so he couldn't replenish his magic power, and so he had to save his strength. And besides, if he participates in the battle, the amount of experience points he'll get will be greatly reduced. Suho immediately realized that means he won't help. And at that moment, he started to use a skill and decided that he would try to do it himself. The goblin axe that was behind him began to rise into the air, and with it the battle axe flew towards our hero, which at the same moment he started to use the skill and control it in the air, destroying all the goblins on his way. Because with the help of his skill, which is indicated in the status window as if he had acquired an invisible hand. But at that moment an arrow that flew towards our hero flew near his head, but he raised his hand in time to catch it. He looked up. He saw that the arrow that came was from another goblin who was standing on the roof, and pulled his magical bowstring and started to pull the arrow back. In just a second, the goblin archer was destroyed, or as he watched the battle, he realized that he was adaptable. And this unusual birth of a hero from myths similar to the childhood story of the Little Lord. The Little Lord was free to use the power of the Lords, but this power was created to destroy everything, so it was harming the peaceful world. But now that the apostles are invading the land again, the Little Lord's village is finally beginning to blossom. And at that moment, Suho hung up his level, and he realized that the ruler's strength he could raise no more than a kilogram. But at that moment, another goblin came behind him and attacked him in the back. Smiling evilly, the goblin was pleased to have wounded the young Shadow Lord. But at that moment, a retaliatory strike came in and killed the goblin in a matter of seconds. Beru noticed this and started asking how he was feeling. But all that was overshadowed by the fact that a new creature appeared on the battlefield, emitting a huge red energy. It was the strongest goblin centurion. Suho didn't pay any attention to him, but drew his weapon and slowly started to turn towards the goblins that were attacking from all sides. But he was ready for them, and he got into a fighting stance and began to fight. Swinging his blade, he took down one goblin after another. But then he threw the dagger he was holding straight at the goblin centurion. And with incredible speed, the blade reached its target. Suho began to realize that he felt more alive than when his powers were down. And now he was ready to fight with all the strength he had at the moment. And as he fought, and the young point and the O-hen point slowly dropped. But it wasn't over. He fought with all his might, and he was sure he could beat it and hold on for 4 hours. Because it was the only good chance he had to level up against tough opponents. And just a few minutes later, the notification system showed that he had learned the resilience skill and his level had been raised. Soon after that, he managed to take out all the goblins that were in his way. But also the notification system said he had minutes to complete the mission, and Beru said that he was doing great, and he had no doubt for a minute that he would pass the challenge. And the notification system also said that he had received a reward for completing the challenge. And the reward was a rune stone. If he used it, he would get this shadow extraction skill. Beru was very happy because the young lord would be extracting shadows. Suho also noticed that during the battle, he also got the skill resilience. So after awakening, he gets the skills and the level-up system. And compared to the time before awakening, He seems to have become too powerful. Beru explained that his leveling system is an improved version of the system that the Lord used in the past, and it is also a means for his steady growth. And he thought he wasn't awakened, but he turned out to be the strongest Shadow Lord ever. And that he got the rune stone so he could break the rune stone and absorb it from me. And once he cracked the rune stone, the notification system said that he had learned the shadow extraction skill and realized that he could create shadow soldiers. This skill exceeds the dead body of a monster into a soldier like him, and that is the power that makes the current Shadow Lord Seung Jin Woo exist. It's kind of like a necromancer, but to be one, he has to hunt, so he can only control those weaker than him. And he's heard that the summoning skill isn't very popular with hunters. But as soon as he wanted to extract the shadow, the notification system prompted him to name the command for the shadow extraction skill. Suho realized that he needed a special command to extract it. Beru started to suggest that the command should be something intuitive and intuitive. But after a moment of thought, Suho used the same phrase as her father to rise up. And as soon as he gave the command, the shadow began to gather and rise. And then Suho saw a small green hand appear on the wall. And as soon as the preparations were finished, he saw the first-level shadow goblins appear. He couldn't believe his own eyes that this was the extraction, and that it wasn't as bad a skill as expected. Initially, soldiers who only shadow extraction were a little weaker than when they were alive and smaller in stature. But also the notification system showed that they would disappear after 24 hours, but Beru was surprised that he didn't have the skill. Shadow power affects intelligence and level. Also, so this will be a really useful skill in the future. It's an incredibly good skill. Suho realized this and told him not to be upset. But now he realized that he hadn't eaten in a day. His stomach started to growl. He started asking Beru how he could get out of here, and he said that with the key to the shadow dungeon, he could get out at any time, so they decided that they would go and eat. A little while later, Suho was sitting in her hospital tent enjoying her meal. He also had no idea that hospital food was so delicious. Beru, watching him, said that his little overlord, he will explain to him what to do next, and they are given only 3 tasks. The first is to protect the Earth from demons from outer space, to which Suho suggested they go into the dungeon and catch demonic creatures. Beru also confirmed that as they hunt the creatures, their level will increase, and the stronger they are, the safer the Earth will be. 3 is to find his missing mom, and is there any way to find out where she is? Asked Suho. But Beru said that if they keep catching these creatures, maybe they can find a clue, and eventually they need to go to the dungeon. And the final 3rd task is the most important one. Beru has to regain his strength because he doesn't like the regular soldiers, and he wants to show him all his enemy power. But Suho started asking what he should do to regain his strength, and Beru replied that he could absorb some of the knowledge and magic items. It used to be an ineffective way to use the item, thus becoming a shadow soldier. But since he can't get magic power, there's nothing left for him to do. He can eat something magical anyway, so Suho decided that he had to go to the dungeon anyway. And now they're going to prepare. But to enter the dungeon, the Hunters Association will determine the level of magical ability. And determining the level of magical ability, he's an awakened man who's raising his level. And now he has to check what grade he'll get, because it would be great if it was S rank. But the next day, when he went to the Hunters Association, the girl said that his magical ability level, and now he's the weakest hunter to be awarded an E rank. A little while later, he left the Hunters Association and decided he had to figure out something to get into the dungeon. Beru started to say that he had heard that a hunter's level is determined by the amount of magic power, and the little lord he was focusing on increasing his physical stats would certainly prove to be inferior to his skills. But Suho said he shouldn't be comforted. It's more frustrating that way. And the shadow powers are evaluating the level of whether he can defend the land so early, but he still needs to raise his level. Because he heard that hunters of this rank can't just join the team, so entering the dungeon will be a problem. But there's one way he's going to check out right now, because the capture team fights in the dungeon. And then there's the collection team that takes the body of the creatures. And then there's the extraction team, which is the extraction team. And that way he can get into the dungeon, except for the capture team hunters of E rank, even with E rank, can enter the dungeon. A little later in the dungeon, workers started carrying magic crystals and bringing them out. Suho, who was standing near the magic crystals, began to scratch his head because he had no idea that it was such a hard job. He turned around and began to tell another hunter who was standing next to him that he was thankful to know him, because he didn't know any other than him. This guy is a teacher's aide, and in the art department of a Korean university, he is also a self-awakened E rank, and that he was lucky to have him around because he was able to work in the dungeon. But suddenly the guy asked Suho. He started apologizing to him for giving him problems at the university, because there were no other awakened people there besides him, and he got scared and ran away. Suho recalled this situation when he was told that he was an awakened person and should do something, to which he replied that he had an E rank. Now he's apologizing for not doing anything at the time, but Suho told him to raise his head because he's also an E-ranked awakened man. And the association says that E-rank hunters should run away as fast as they can when they encounter a demonic creature. But that guy was just surprised that Suho is also an E-rank, to which Suho replied that his magical ability scores are equal. But that guy couldn't believe it was true because when he was running away, he saw Suho fighting a demonic creature on the roof. But now he couldn't realize if it was true and if he was wrong. And if his rank had gone up after the creature attacked, then he's really cool. But at that moment, Beer appeared next to that guy and started saying that the little lord is cool. But the guy turned around to see whose voice it was, and as soon as he saw the shadow soldier, he immediately sidestepped and started yelling that there's a demonic creature here. Suho didn't understand why he came out of the shadows, but the shadow soldier answered that the little lord is now at the level of a weak ant larva, and so it would be safer if he stayed close to him and protected him. The guy started to get to his feet and asked if he had awakened as a summoned hunter, to which Suho replied that it seemed so. And there are a lot of hunters who have no skills at all, but he was lucky. But this guy had a skill, so Suho teased him that if that's why he was running away from the monsters so fast. But as soon as he spoke, the guy sat down and got nervous. Suho said it was just a joke. And then he turned around and started telling Suho that he had finally killed him. Suho started looking into the cave and realized that this was the first time he was in a dungeon other than the shadow dungeon. And now he's facing a task force going after demonic creatures. And this rapture team is looking at what appears to be an empty dungeon and judging by the fact that they've only come across demonic wolves. But wolf pelt is worth a lot of money, so they need to collect that stuff too. But there are also sometimes groups of magic stones, so there's nothing left to do but keep looking. Don't get frustrated, just go through the dungeon to the end to find out. But at that moment, a guy showed up and started telling the captain that there was something here. And as soon as they got inside, they saw this huge room that was glowing brightly. They couldn't figure out what the ruins were, and maybe they should go out and call for backup. And they couldn't recognize any demonic creatures, but they couldn't understand why there was such a structure, but no monsters, and now they decided to find out. And at that moment, they saw some strange weapon in front of them, and nobody could understand what. Is it the treasure hidden here instead of the boss? The guys couldn't figure it out, because they didn't even think there could be a weapon stuck in the ground. Really cool, so the guys decided to try to see what it really was. But one of the guys said they'd have to test it to know for sure, but it looks like a great weapon. But the other guy said to be careful. There could be traps with such a treasure. The captain approached the ball and said he'd take it and not leave. When he touched the sword, it began to glow a bright color, and the captain said that even if he had a rank, he could overcome it. But at that moment, there was a bright flash of light that shone through the entire space in the dungeon. And the captain couldn't understand what it was because he saw a whole different place that just happened to have... The other guy standing next to him said there didn't seem to be any trap. But the captain should be careful with that sword. They don't know what it is, and he'll have to be more careful next time. But at that moment, the captain swung his sword and destroyed his first comrade. The other hunters couldn't understand what he had just done. But the captain began to turn into some strange creature and say that whoever dared to take the sword is the Lord of the Fang. And now he must destroy all those who invaded the Fang Lord's domain. So the captain began to destroy one hunter after another. But in the other dungeon, the workers couldn't realize that they had just been closed. Suho started to show his comrade that he had the ability to summon goblins. The guy started to say that he had heard that these abilities only summon 1 or 2 creatures, and he had summoned 3. And that this guy's power was definitely abnormal, but he couldn't understand why he was so low-ranked. You can only summon 3, and to use shadow extraction, you need a body which is inconvenient. But you can just get goblin bodies from the dungeon and use them as free labor. Suho just now realized that shadow extraction is a really good ability. A hunter with a low rank is classified by the Hunters Association and cannot enter the dungeon alone since he started to divide the hunter's rank. A lot of time has passed, and more mistakes are made by the measuring machine. So when he hangs up the level, maybe his rank will be measured again. And also, Suho started to tell the taker that if he remembers their third mission, they can do it here. Because he said that it regenerates if it eats something magical. I'll tell you how many magic crystals these crystals contain magical powers. And that it doesn't help with the loot anyway, so why don't I do it now? Suho suddenly asked the bear, "Did the Overlord really show up here? Maybe something his father?" But the bar replied that it wasn't like that. His father wasn't the only Overlord. If it was his father, his village would be rebuilt in a second. But this creature and that odor were something else entirely, and right now they needed to be wary. The other diggers who were in this dungeon couldn't figure out what that noise was coming from the cave. As soon as they turned towards it, they realized that all that rumbling was coming from the cave right in front of them. And then they wondered if they had any direction to where their capture team was headed. But that's when they started looking closer. And they noticed that some strange creature had begun to emerge from the cave. As they got closer, the diggers realized it wasn't human. And this is a demonic creature, but they could not understand where they came from, because the hunters had recently entered the cave. At the same moment, they started to turn around and run with all their might towards the exit to escape. But one of the workers started waving at the demonic creature in panic, and although he was gripped by panic, he desperately continued waving his pickaxe. But the demon dog came closer and grabbed the pickaxe with its huge mouth. The miner, looking at the destroyed pickaxe, could not understand how this monster managed to destroy it in a matter of seconds. And at that moment he realized that he was about to be finished, and with a desperate cry he began to call for help from the other hunters. Just as the monster was about to attack the worker jumped back, at which point Suho intervened and ran up from somewhere and hit the demon dog on the head with all his might. Suho at the same moment shouted to his partner that he would buy them time and they should get out. Desperately, his comrade started to run away with all his legs, and lastly said only that he was grateful to him. Suho, for his part, started looking at the demonic dogs and realized that their names were highlighted in orange. And that meant that he was not at the same level as the mist burners in that women's university in Korea. But now he realized that he could handle them alone quite well, because he had already raised his level and now he was much stronger than before. But suddenly he felt angry and started telling him that he was ordering him to run outside. After all, he didn't have to help every time of his own free will, but his comrade replied in a desperate voice that he was all alone and he would try his best to help him. Suho, on the other hand, turned his head and asked him to intercede if he was in danger, but he would still leave 3 goblins to protect him just in case. And now he took out his inventory and began to select the weapons he would use to fight against the demonic dogs. After all, this was the goblin weapon he had gotten in the shadow dungeon, and right now it would be better than a pickaxe. His comrade didn't understand. Could he really even summon weapons? And where did he get such abilities from? Without thinking long, our hero with all his might began to rush towards the demonic dogs. Not even a moment later, the notification system showed Suho that he had defeated the steel-tooth raccoon. The comrades left behind only looked on and rejoiced that their young lord was so strong. But Suho reached back and began to command the demonic dog to let his shadow rise. The 3 goblins and his comrade looked on in horror as he was able to summon the demonic dog. And as soon as the demonic dog was summoned, it immediately started attacking the other demonic dogs, thus helping Suho. Beer, who was watching his little lord, was happy that he was already getting used to fighting using shadow power. But our hero realized that retrieving and summoning shadows didn't waste his mana. If he could summon more creatures as his magic power increased, he would have an entire region. Once he destroyed the demon dog, he immediately decided to summon it. The goblin who was standing beside our hero's partner watched with the same amazement as he summoned another demon dog. At this moment, the notification system once again showed that he was able to defeat the steel-tooth Raiken, and he had gained a new level. But following that song, Suho began to summon another wolf, and this time it was the last one he had defeated. At this moment, his comrade began to ask Song Suho, "What is this? After all, this is clearly not a rank E ability. How could he be able to resurrect demonic beings?" Song Suho suddenly hesitated as he began to realize that he had lost his temper this time, and he needed to quickly think of a way to talk himself out of it. Turning around, he said that this was basically rank E, but his comrade could not understand. Had Song Suho intentionally registered under a false rank? Song Suho suddenly turned around towards the cave where the demonic creatures came out of and realized that he still had a task left and still had one enemy left. But he couldn't figure out what that enemy was since he had already destroyed all the Raikans. In the distance, he began to see a strange silhouette of a man and could not understand if it was his last enemy. But it looked like it was a person from the capture team. Suddenly, Song Suho's comrade began to approach that hunter and asked, did he really survive? After all, they were attacked by demonic creatures and almost killed. At this moment, the expression on the hunter's face changed, and the guys realized that now. And as soon as the hunter Song Suho pulled his comrade aside at the same moment, because right in front of his face flew a sword that broke his glasses. As soon as the huge sword struck the ground, Song Suho managed to pull his comrade aside. In fear, Song Suho immediately began to order his wolves to attack this hunter. Without a second thought, the wolves from all sides began to pounce on the hunter to destroy him. At the same time, Song Suho began to pull his comrade away and said that he was unlucky this time because he had once again been caught by a demonic creature that had lost its mind. And to make matters worse, the color of his name had turned red, which meant that he was a very strong opponent. After all, the redder the color, the more dangerous the creature, and at the Women's University in Korea, he had heartily felt how strong red-level creatures were. So the sensible thing to do would be to take his comrade and run as far away from this place as possible. As soon as they left the area where that hunter was, our hero began to ask Bear what he meant when he said he could sense the Overlord. Bear replied that the hunter carries his energy, but is not even close in power to the Overlord. However, even so, he is not his equal yet. To which Song Suho replied that he understands everything right now. For now, he needed to open his inventory and come up with a plan, but Beer couldn't understand. Did the little lord really want to fight? Song Suho immediately replied that the system said that it was in some way a safety mechanism to ensure his growth, which meant that since he was given this assignment, he had a chance to win. Besides, if he wanted to meet his parents, he needed to get stronger sooner rather than later. And to get stronger, he needs to destroy this monster and raise his level. After scattering all the weapons he had in his inventory, he decided that he would defeat the enemy now and be able to raise his level. BR looked at Song Suho and was very touched by his words. BR in turn began to say that he faces trials he can't handle over and over again and never avoids battles. And that with this weak character comes the character of a lord. And just as the hunter began to approach Song Suho, BR said that the body of that thing that had taken hold of the hunter was a sword. If he could wrestle the sword away from the bearer would no longer be able to move. At this moment, the hunter began to approach Song Suho little by little. But at this moment, the shadow wolves began to surround him and attack him from all sides. As soon as one of the wolves was able to grab the hunter's sword, our hero realized that that hunter was indeed up again after using magic. Bear added that shadow soldiers are essentially immortal. If there is magic, they can regenerate as long as they want. Song Suho realized at this moment that the power of the shadow soldiers was the key to superiority over any enemy. But at this moment he saw that the hunter had easily destroyed his shadow wolf with one swing of his sword. Bear added that the hunter was destroying the shadows so easily because his magic was still weak. Suddenly the hunter turned to Song Suho, saying how a lowly person like him could use the power of a shadow lord. Song Su. Ho was surprised that the hunter could speak, but Beard jumped into the conversation and started yelling at the hunter, how dare he call a lord from the Shadow Lord lineage a lowlife. The hunter didn't like this and replied that he hadn't thought of meeting the Shadow Lord lineage again. Without thinking long, the hunter started shouting that Song Suho was the Fang Lord's enemy. Without thinking long, Song Suho began to raise his weapon and said that he would now begin to test his level. With all speed, he started throwing his weapon, destroying the goblins and aiming it straight at the hunter. But the hunter easily began to repel all of his attacks. And then Suho realized that, as expected from the red name, the hunter was easily repelled. After scattering his weapons all over the area, Suho decided that he would act differently in this case. Without thinking long, he extended his arm and decided that he would just take quantity now. Bear, being behind him, realized that this was the ruler's strength that he had been using since he was an infant. As he continued to attack, Suho made sure that all of his attacks were easily repelled by that red hunter. As soon as he came close, the hunter struck a few more times and broke the weapon he was holding. Looking at the hunter, Suho saw an intimidating gaze directed straight at him. Dodging all of the hunter's attacks, Suho realized that it felt like it was impossible for him to fight back. If this hunter hit him once, he would be finished. If he were to stall for time, his chances of winning would be gone. But suddenly the hunter began to shout, "Are you really going to avoid the battle like this? Right now you look like a coward hiding behind the Shadow Lord and the Shadow Soldiers." But Suho began to smile and replied to the hunter, "Affecting your parents is a violation of the rules. And you don't have the confidence to approach even if you provoke like this." Thinking back to that conversation with Bear, if his seal is wrong, why doesn't he regain the ability to climb the tower? But Bear replied that his powers were sealed when he was still young, and he could be said to have regained the skill of those shadows. If he had those powers, he could rival Itarim. However, this place isn't a dream or reality. It's a test to see if he can handle the powers. The physical strength was destined to disappear whether the test succeeded or not. Then it's true. It's just a game. The experience of being in the tower wasn't meaningless. Suho recalled that he remembered precisely and clearly the sensations he felt when he passed the Tower of Trials. And at least if he had something like an iron glove like back then. Suho recalled Bear's words, "Shadow soldiers are essentially immortal. If there's magic, they can regenerate for as long as they want." And if you think of it that way, Bear can also change form at will. In that case, he can now come up with new plans to overpower this hunter. Once the preparations were over, he began to summon his shadow dogs anew. But the red hunter continued to attack and shouted, "Suho, are you really at it again? Haven't you learned that it doesn't work to send those meaningless shadow dogs at me? Right now, I'll just cut you down to the point where your shadow soldiers can get close to me." But at this moment, something strange began to happen on the battlefield. Suho began to extract shadows and transform them into matter that enveloped his hands. At this moment, the red hunter made a decisive strike, causing a huge explosion to sound after the strike. But with his head down, the red hunter couldn't realize what had just happened, as his attack was simply blocked. As soon as he lowered his gaze, he saw Suho blocking his attack and said, "Riken Steelfang lives up to his name. Just now, the notification system showed that I was able to retrieve the Iron Glove transformation form." Suho immediately realized that with this skill, he would be able to easily approach and deal with this hunter. As soon as they started exchanging blows, the entire atmosphere in the dungeon changed. Bear, who was watching from behind, couldn't believe his eyes. Suho was able to use the Shadow Soldier's weapons. A far superior level Shadow Lord was in a state of mastery and could manipulate all shadows at will. Like an ant caterpillar that had just discovered shadow power, how was he able to discover the next stage of shadow power that no one had ever told him about? The martial arts mastery that Suho had just shown was very impressive. This ruler power that Suho had mastered without any support or hints was amazing. Most importantly, the way he used the shadow power. Bear realized that Suho had completely mastered it. At this moment, Suho threw the red hunter straight into the nearest wall with all his might, causing a huge explosion. But that wasn't enough. The red hunter suddenly jumped up from his seat and started screaming loudly. All of this was not enough, as the weapon that Suho started to raise flew straight at the red hunter. Bear immediately noticed that his little lord had become much stronger than before. Right now he realized that Suho was a true prodigy. As soon as he managed to defeat the red hunter said that with his red name, he thought he wouldn't be defeated. But it was all over. Bear immediately added that he didn't doubt his victory for a moment. Raising his hand, Suho realized that he had gotten used to a new fighting technique during this fight. He decided to look at his awards, and the notification system immediately showed them. The notification system asked if he wanted a quest reward, to which Suho replied that he was willing to accept. The notification system started showing the rewards for the quest. The first reward was the Storm Strike Rune Stone, and the second skill he had mastered was Storm Strike. At this moment, the aura enveloping Suho began to glow bright blue, and he realized that the skill was the most coveted reward, and he instinctively already knew how to use it. He decided to test it in action while he had time and practice. He turned his attention to the weapon that lay at his feet. The voice kept saying to the Red Hunter that this was all After all, this was just boundless human greed. When Suho raised his sword, it would completely devour him. As soon as Suho raised the sword, the notification system showed that he had acquired a new item, the Raken Fang. Suho immediately noticed that this sword looked much better than the goblin sword he had gotten in the first dungeon when he was training and leveling up. But the voice from within the sword continued to ponder that there was really a person who had inherited the fang and was not under its control. When all the preparations were finished, Suho started practicing with his new weapon in different directions. Destroying all the rocks that were nearby, he began to use his Storm Strike skill. The large mana consumption from a single strike could be a problem, but he liked the effect. Suho had told Beru that the reaction to shadow extraction was completely different, and the power of shadows was 1,000, if not tens of thousands of times stronger. As soon as Suho swung his sword for the last time, he noticed that his comrade started to come to his senses. Walking over to him, he asked if he was all right, but his comrade couldn't understand what had happened. Opening his eyes fully, he saw the Red Hunter who was lying next to him. Suho said that he couldn't explain everything in 2 words and they would talk outside. A little later, all the hunters and workers started to leave the portal. Sitting on a bench, Suho's comrade began to ask him what he would do. He replied that he was going to check if there were still survivors in the dungeon. As soon as Suho entered the dungeon, his comrade couldn't understand. Did this guy really awaken with the summoning skill? In such a trifling situation, he couldn't understand when Suho had become so strong. Although right now it didn't matter anymore. Watching all the survivors who called their relatives to say that they were fine, most of them couldn't understand what had happened inside the dungeon. The guy sitting on the bench realized that what mattered was that all these people were alive because of Suho. Meanwhile, our hero inside the dungeon started destroying all the Iron Demon dogs. Once he destroyed some of them, he told Beer that there are still many more wolf monsters inside. Bear replied that they all counted as experience, and one should not miss them. Suho turned around and started to wonder why the attack power of this sword had dropped drastically. But the voice inside the sword said that it was probably because it was helping the descendant of the Shadow Lord. Beer began to explain to the voice inside the sword that showing strength against those weaker than him was a pathetic act. The voice replied that he had ever seen a hunter chase after prey that was weaker than he was. But still, Beer added that the young lord had defeated him even though he was many times stronger. Suho turned around and couldn't realize that he was now watching a talking bug and a talking sword, and he still couldn't get used to such a thing. A little later, he still reached the place where that sword was taken out from. After examining everything there, he saw that all the hunters who were there had been destroyed. The sword suddenly began to speak. "Everyone who entered here will be destroyed. My mission is to protect the Fang Lord's shrine." But Suho took the sword in his hands, and with all his might, he shoved it into the same place from which it had been taken out. Turning around, he started to look at the destroyed hunter, but the notification system immediately showed him that the target for releasing the shadow was present and asked if he wished to extract the shadow. Suho immediately started to ask Bear if it was possible to use shadow release on humans, to which Bear immediately replied that if it was a destroyed body, any creature could become a shadow soldier. But Suho, without thinking long, picked up the destroyed hunters and started carrying them to the exit of the dungeon. Beer couldn't understand if he wasn't going to use the shadow release. Suho turned around and only said that forcing someone to fight after death was more like punishment. Bear was greatly surprised by these words, for he couldn't even imagine that the young lord wouldn't subdue the annihilated. At this moment, Suho began to ask Bear if it was true that this was the Lord's shrine. Bear replied that it was true. Suho continued by saying that his father and the lord he destroyed were somehow related to the Itarim. Bear explained that the Itarim are the non-Nash enemies of his overlord, and that overlord is a past enemy. There are 9 monarchs, including their lord. His father, Seung Jin Woo, the monarch of the dead, lord of the shadows, protector of the entire planet, has saved it more than once. Then there is the king of beasts, the lord of fangs, who is as strong as the other monarchs. After that comes the king of insects, the lord of plague, King Yan, the lord of strength, the king of demons, the lord of pale mist. Also present is the king of giants, the lord of beginnings, but he has never met him personally. Then there is the king of snowmen, the lord of snow, the king of the dead, the lord of the spirit world. And finally, the last king of giants, the lord of destruction, and the lord of dragons. All 9 kings have power beyond comprehension, but 8 of them died trying to attack the earth. And that's right, the Shadow Lord is his master, the one who destroyed the Fang Lord. At this moment, the sword began to speak. If my strength was at the proper level, I would have torn apart the Shadow Lord's blood descendant and thrown it to be eaten by the wolves. Suho replied that it wasn't that he didn't understand his wishes, but his father had defeated the other kings just to protect the land. Was he also only trying to protect this place from invaders? No matter what side you're on, they're trying to protect what they care about. And all he cares about is that he only wants to fight him because of a blood bond. And if protecting this place is his mission, isn't it silly to show hatred for a father who couldn't defeat a Fang Lord? He just wants to meet the parents he can't see because of the invaders, and for the sake of his goal, he's willing to rely on any force. When the Itarim begin their invasion, this place won't be safe either. If he helps him, he will protect this place too. The voice that lurked within the sword could not understand. Was he really proposing to join forces with the Blood Heir? Grasping the hilt of the sword, Suho decided to make sure for sure. Would this sword agree to serve him to protect this place and the entire planet? At this moment, the Shadow and Fangs would fight hand in hand on this front in unison. A little later, the reporters who were sitting in the cafe with Suho's friend started asking questions regarding yesterday's incident in the dungeon. They wanted to know all the details that he could tell them since he was there personally. Lim Dong-yun, the survivor of yesterday's incident, picked up his coffee cup and said that he would tell them everything. He actually wanted the case to get publicity and the attitude of Suho, who has a rank of E, to improve. This is a great opportunity for Suho for saving the day. A little later, a headline came out about an event where a rank E hunter had single-handedly saved other hunters in a dungeon. The article contained information about the brave hunter who threw himself at the monster to save people, as well as interviews with many of the survivors he saved. Elsewhere, the guys sitting at the table started scratching their pens behind their ears, for now it was time to choose a couple people. In another guild management department, one of the guys said that the information gathering team was also resenting that they needed more people, and it seemed like they needed to hire a few more E-rank hunters. The guy sitting at the main desk, specifically the second-in-command case, said to send him one candidate. The guy at the computer started looking and saw that it was a rank E hunter who had fought monsters in the dungeon, evacuated a team of miners, and brought a wounded hunter out of the dungeon. The guys who saw that he had rank E were immediately surprised, but the second person in management started to say, "Don't they realize that it would be fine to take him to a big guild like ours and we can cover up one scandal?" At this moment, a guy asked if Hunter Suho had replied to their letter, because the newcomer had already managed to get an invitation from the Black Turtles Guild, and he must be happy. But the other guy turned around and told the leader that he had declined the offer, causing the leader to not be able to understand why. After all, this guy is just a rank E rookie and he's turning down such a big guild. "I don't understand, what's the point?" the leader said. The other guy replied that Hunter Suho didn't want to join any guilds. The leader was angry with this kind of answer. He couldn't understand if this guy thought he was some S-ranked hunter. "This isn't the end yet. We're sure that Suho himself will contact us soon. Sooner or later, he'll realize how difficult it is for a hunter without a guild." At this time, Suho, while in his apartment, began to look at the notifications that came on his phone. He realized that once he visited that dungeon, he had no shortage of guild invitations. A lot of people want to get their hands on him specifically, but everyone wants to hire him as a porter or gatherer. He couldn't understand why there were so many. He figured it would be a hindrance to him, and an even bigger hindrance to leveling up with the system, and there was no point in joining them. Right now, he didn't care what the guild wanted to do or who they wanted to get. He had better things to do. Turning to his sword, he began to ask Fang Riken if he wanted to continue the conversation, the one they had started in the dungeon when he suggested combining the powers of Shadow and Fang. Fang Riken couldn't understand how he could calmly utter such nonsense. Are you saying that a shadow can become an ally instead of an enemy? Only under one condition, if you bring me to the Fang Lord's other holy land. At this moment, Suho started to ask if he knew how to get there, to which Fang replied that he knew where all of the Fang Lord's holy lands were located, regardless of the distance. But he feels that the gate leading there has already disappeared and what people call a dungeon breakthrough has most likely happened. Suho immediately realized that this holy place must be an open dungeon. An open dungeon is where creepy and very strong monsters dwell. When a dungeon breach forms in the abandoned gate, the monsters take over the land, turning it into a wasteland. At this moment, Suho, holding his phone in his hand, sent a message to his uncle that he would be gone for a while and not to worry, even if he couldn't contact him. Right now, he needed to move out to seize even more power and raise his level as quickly as possible. A little later, Suho started to ask Beru if they had arrived at that place, to which he replied that it was correct. But at the parkin, they noticed that it was forbidden to enter, and things were not good right now since the guild owned the place. Suho immediately realized that the entrance is forbidden, and the Hyena Guild is made up of people who used to be gangsters, so they're all scary. Bear started to say that he shouldn't listen to these lowly creatures, because the young lord had better raise his level. While Fang was arguing with Bear, Suho got angry and asked them what they were doing there. Right now, I'm ready to go inside, and I'll use my power to do so. He started breaking the cameras with his power. Bear asked him what about the guild, to which Suho replied that he had his own way out. As soon as he broke the last camera, it completely disintegrated into small pieces. Suho decided that if they did that, they wouldn't have any evidence. Bear added that his methods reminded him of the Overlord. Once inside, Suho couldn't understand why there was a blue mist in all the open dungeons. Bear began to explain that it was mana from outer space. It gathers through the dimension walls, causing a gap in the worlds. Because of this, the fog from the Holy Land where it was broke through the dimension and came to Earth. The creatures from the outside world are trying to punch a huge hole in the dimension to send their armies here. The more mana a creature has, the more it is affected by traveling through the dimension. Suho realized that the strongest ones would not be here yet. He should hurry up and raise his level before other hunters came here. At this moment, raising his head, he saw huge monsters in the trees. One of them was a fanged Vriga, and the other was a black shadow rogue. The Fang immediately started telling Suho that now was the time for him to show his strength, to which Suho replied that he could rely on him. But he wouldn't use him as his main weapon, causing Fang to be perplexed. Suho made a decision after much deliberation that it was time for him to fight the way he wanted to. He would use his fists like he did in training as a base. For mid-range combat, the ruler's strength would be the support. To avoid being predictable, he will use different weapons. Using extraction, he would get more equipment to improve his skills and characteristics, leveling up on his own. Beer was absolutely thrilled with what he heard from his young overlord. Fang also realized that this was the power of the Shadow Lord's bloodline. The more enemies and the longer the battle dragged on, the stronger he became using the demons and monsters he destroyed. At this moment, Suho decided that now that his intelligence scores were higher, he could summon 5 shadows. But at this moment, Beer said that it was insignificant compared to a great lord who could summon thousands. Suho blushed and ordered him to shut up. Going even further into the depths of the forest, Suho saw that they had come to the very place that Fang was talking about. Fang began to say that there was a gate leading to the Holy Lands here, but now they were seeing some kind of strange warehouse. Suho noticed that even though it was late, there were still people here. He wondered if there was a special reason for them to stay late. After all, hunting monsters was better during the day. At that moment, a car pulled up to the workers and hunters who were inside. The car began to bring out people who were tied up by their arms and legs. Suho immediately realized that he was witnessing a kidnapping being performed right in front of his eyes. Bear supported him by saying that it looked exactly like what they were seeing. Bear began to address the young lord that they were here illegally, so they shouldn't interfere. If they realized he had trespassed into their territory, his hunters would have reason to attack. But as soon as Bear finished speaking and turned around, he saw that Suho had disappeared. He couldn't understand where he had gone. Was he really going to go to those people? Suho, who grew up in the arms of a police officer father who specialized in violent crimes and a legendary firefighter grandfather, couldn't stay away. He grew up with a sense of justice, and in this moment he couldn't stand idly by. Suho accelerated at full speed and began to approach the first hunter that was in his way. He had a deep habit of acting first and thinking later when it came to justice. At the same moment, Suho accelerated with all his might and hit that guy with his shoe. The shadows who were watching were completely shocked by what they had just seen. The other hunters, seeing that their comrade had just been kicked in the head, were also shocked. After the kick, that guy's face had sealed right into the ground, and the guys only saw a silhouette flying by, which was Suho. They couldn't understand who that guy was, but Suho realized everything that was happening at that moment because he realized that his body reacted faster than his brain. He realized that he had invaded another guild's territory illegally, and now he didn't know what to do. Putting on his shadow mask, he turned around and began to ask, "Are you really kidnapping people? What is your guild hyena doing?" The other hunters began to ask back, asking what he was doing, invading other people's territory and attacking them out of the blue. "It looks like you came here for us to destroy you." At the same moment, the other hunters started using their magic and enhanced equipment to deal with Suho. One of the hunters started attacking Suho, who successfully dodged all of his attacks. As he swung, Suho thought about what he had learned earlier. The average rank of the Hyena Guild members was D. He definitely doesn't know their strength, so he shouldn't relax. Taking a swing, he hit one of the hunters with all his might, who flew away at an incredible speed. The other hunters, noticing the silhouette of their comrade flying away, couldn't understand what had just happened. Following this, Suho began to eliminate one by one the hunters who were approaching him from all directions. Bear, who was watching the battle, could not believe that the awakened ones, who had reached the D rank by human standards, were no longer competitors for Suho. Right now, the status window indicated that Suho possessed level 16. A little later, Suho decided to tie up all the hunters so that they wouldn't be able to leave the area while he went about his business. Beer beside him began to say that it was a graceful completion. Suho began to untie all the guys who had been kidnapped by the guild. They began to thank him for saving them. They also asked if he was from the Hunter Association. He replied that they could assume that he was. He said he would handle things here and they should quickly evacuate to safety. Once the guys got into the car and drove away, Suho couldn't understand why the guild was kidnapping people. At this moment, Fang started telling Suho that he was feeling something. Suho asked him, "Feel what?" Fang replied that that was why he asked him to come here. As soon as they reached the fence, they started to go inside the room. What Suho saw shocked him. He couldn't believe his own eyes. There were many cages inside the room. Beer also added that there was a sense of energy in the room, although it was very vague. Suho turned his head and saw a locked dog in the nearest cages, but he couldn't understand why the Hyena Guild was doing this. Fang added that it seemed to him that it wasn't a dog, but a small wolf. "The descendant of the King of Beasts, Lord Fang," Fang said. Hearing this, Suho couldn't believe his own ears. Fang went on to say that right after his defeat in the war with the Shadow Lord, Lord Fang had ordered the surviving descendant to be hidden in the shrine and guarded because he believed that if the blood ties were not broken, another Lord Fang would appear. He honestly admitted that he didn't expect to find a Fang Lord in this particular place. At this moment, Suho broke the shackles restraining the little wolf cub, and lifting him up in his arms, he finished listening to the story about how the Lord hoped that his clan would not be interrupted. He seems to vaguely sense the Fang Lord's aura and has lost a lot of energy. He will die if left like this, Fang said. Beru asked the young lord what he would do. Suho, after briefly thinking, replied that he thought there were only a few people there, but here was another one. He was angry now, realizing that there was one last one left that he should destroy. Turning his head around, he saw a demonic creature that began to tell Suho that trusting people was useless. The creature, calling him Braki, said that he had survived. Suho immediately asked if they knew each other. The Fang replied that he knew him. "This is the hunter of the descendant I told you about," Fang said. Braki immediately began telling Fang that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and that Raikan Fang was also alive, as he could see. Fang Raikan immediately began to say that he hadn't forgotten that he had been sent to guard the descendant. "What were you doing all this time while that little wolf cub was in shackles?" Fang asked. Suho, holding the wolf cub in his arms, didn't have time to notice when Braki ran up to him with incredible speed and asked how dare he touch his property. Following that, Braki struck hard with his tail, causing Suho to fly off to the side. Bear noticed this and began to shout if his lord was all right. The impact was so strong that Suho broke through the wall and crashed into the nearby containers on the street. Beru immediately flew over to him and started asking if his little lord was okay. Suho replied that it was the most painful blow he had taken in a while. "I'm bleeding right now, but don't scream, my head is splitting from the sudden and loud noises," Suho said. Beru, hearing this, went on to say that when he first came here, he felt a vague remaining energy and was sure what it was. "Itarim, I felt Itarim's energy from this guy," Bear said. Fang and Braki started listening to Bear, who turned to Braki and asked if he knew what he had done to the Overlord's descendant. Braki interrupted his story and began to explain that he knew how he, who had lost his sanctuary, managed to maintain such a level of strength. According to natural selection, the strongest survive. The survival of the weak is determined by the whims of the strong. The weak become food for the strong. It's a law of nature. Although this guy is quite weak, he belongs to the Fang Lord's bloodline and can be said to be the best source of nourishment. That's why I feed on it, to gain strength and be as strong as I am at the moment. Periodically, I draw the energy of the Lord's descendant from this little wolf cub as well. After this story, Braki vowed that once he was done here, he would definitely destroy Fang. At this moment, Suho raised his hand and said that his death was a proof of weakness. But Braki interrupted Suho and told him that his body was fit for the strong. Just as Braki continued to say that the next Fang Lord would be fit, Suho used his sword to attack Braki with his strength. Beer took advantage of the moment, grabbed the little wolf cub, and began to carry it away from the battle site. Following that, the sword returned to Suho's hands. Once he was sure that the little wolf cub was all right, Suho also began to address Fang. "I thought you were angry with me, but it's all right. However, I have a case with that guy too. After all, right now will be the first clash between Fang and Shadow. Right now, I've finally found a lead leading to my father." At that moment, the notification system began to show our hero that he had received an assignment. The content of the assignment, an urgent hyena hunt. He must defeat the hyena to ensure safety. That's when Suho realized that he guessed who the guild was named after. Once the monster managed to create a guild by kidnapping people, and how it was all related to Itarim. The other hunters in the guild who were connected to Suho started yelling for Braki to release them. They said that this guy wasn't that easy, and they would also help him fight him if he untied them. Suho at the same moment shouted out that he wouldn't stand silently by and watch. At this moment, Braki attacked his guild subordinates and destroyed them with a single blow. Afterward, he started saying that if they thought he would need help to deal with this guy, they had forgotten their place. Immediately, you become prey when you forget your place. Suho, seeing how he had destroyed his comrades, became extremely angry and began to approach the monster very quickly. As soon as he threw the first punch, his opponent immediately blocked it. Suho began to ask, "Did you really kill those people just because you were playing with them?" Braki replied, "The strong lord it over the life and death of the weak. You think the strong need a reason to do whatever comes into their head?" He followed that up with another blow, but our hero managed to dodge and jumped aside. Jumping up into the air, Suho started flying at Brocky from top to bottom. Along the way, he used his new skill that he had recently obtained, Stormblade. But these attacks were too weak, and Brocky began to ask, "Is this really all you can do? You're dishonoring the name of the owner of the Fang heirloom." Suddenly, from the other side, a sword flew straight at the monster, and the monster couldn't understand where such a hidden attack was coming from. Suho, who was standing in front of it, started waving his hand and controlling the sword, saying that this wasn't the end. Fang suddenly began to ask Brocky, "Why have you changed so much? After all, you originally swore your loyalty and honored Raken, but now I don't understand why you've changed so much." But Brocky questioned, "Why did I honor Raken? I don't really have any respect for him. I was only afraid of his power. I didn't want to continue living such an insignificant life, and as soon as I got the chance, I decided to change everything with my own hands." Spreading out, he gave a powerful punch to Suho and said, "There's no time to worry about anyone else right now." As soon as the punch was executed, Suho felt all the pain, and he felt like all his bones were broken. However, Suho began to remember something that had been long forgotten. "After all, when I think of my father who right now could be fighting someone, I am filled with incredible strength, and this strength gives me more understanding that I shouldn't give up." Gathering all his strength into one punch, he began to use the shadow technique, reinforcing his fists with armor. With all his might, he struck his opponent, for he couldn't lose to some pathetic monster right now. Beru, who was watching the battle, couldn't believe that his young lord was so strong at his young age. Fang Raikun, who was lying on the ground, began to remember the strength combined from the broken sword. Would he really be destroyed like this? The survival of the descendants and the future of the Fang all depends only on Suho right now, and he still wants to fight. He's still waiting for the battle. At this moment, the little wolf cub began to rise up, even though it was very hard for him. Fang Raikun saw this and realized that the little wolf cub, Sir Raken's descendant, was rising up, disregarding the pain he was feeling. He noticed that Suho's fighting spirit inspired the little wolf cub. "The last thing I can do is only help. I can pass on the remaining power in me to the descendant." At this time, Suho continued to fight, and although his opponent was very strong, our hero continued to hold back all of his blows. As soon as he was thrown aside, he began to slowly raise his head and looked at the monster that was slowly approaching him. As he lifted his head, he saw a notification in front of him, and the system was showing that he had hit points left. The monster came closer and closer, and with its terrifying aura said, "For a mere worm, you have good stamina." At this moment, it swung around to finally deliver the final blow and destroy Suho. But at this moment, the wolf worm, having gained strength, clawed at the paw of the monster that had just wanted to finish Suho off. Suho couldn't understand what had just happened and where the wolf cub had come from. As soon as the wolf cub completed its attack, he stood up in defense of the young Shadow Lord. Following that, the notification system showed that the Fang descendant was paying tribute to the player's fighting spirit and offered to accept him as an ally. Suho didn't realize if the Fang descendant was the wolf cub he had met earlier. "Do I really have to accept him as an ally?" The monster in front of them began to speak. "Is he really a descendant? Has he absorbed the magic power of the Raken Fang?" Hearing this, Suho actually realized that this wolf had absorbed the power of the sword. It turns out that Raken Fang sacrificed himself to save his pup. Suho had been trying to cooperate with the Fang from the beginning. After looking at the system notification, he decided that there was no reason to refuse and accepted the invitation. Taking the Fang descendant as an ally, the notification system showed a new window. Data synchronization was now underway. Suho began to notice that something was entering his head. He began to see strange memories of his opponent sitting in a cave near a small wolf cub and saying that they would confront the Lord. After all, in this world, it is survival of the fittest, and we will lose a lot if we lose. We will surely become stronger for the future of the Fangs. Bringing his hand up to the wolf cub, he began stroking its head. A little while later, some strange creatures came to their cave, causing the little wolf cub to start shaking with fear. Young Fang began to ask those creatures why they wouldn't destroy him right here and now. The creature in front of him said that he thought this demonic beast was quite useful and had some good abilities. Touching him, the creature transferred some of its power and said it was choosing him. Now Brocky's hyena is to collect people alive and deliver them to them. This power will help him get rid of unnecessary problems. Of course, depending on how he uses it, most likely this power would be contrary to his desires. At this moment, Suho began to realize that these were the memories of a Fang descendant. These beings who put something in his head are the main instigators who are directly related to Itarim. The Fang descendant didn't want to take revenge on Brocky. He wanted to stop an enraged Brocky. If it had anything to do with their plot, it was necessary to defeat Brocky right here and now. But right now, Suho realized that he didn't have enough strength to defeat him. At this moment, the notification system began to show that an additional quest had opened with the appearance of a companion. The quest information is Monarch's Descendants Quest. He must find the descendants of the monarch and make them his allies. The descendants of the monarch becoming allies is one of 8. Due to the proximity with Fang's descendants, the bonding skill is formed. At this moment, the huge blue aura began to glow brightly, and Suho realized that something was happening here. BR noticed that the young lord was undergoing a change, not the same as the lord. Brocky, seeing this, couldn't understand what it was. Flying towards Suho with all his speed, he swung, determined to stop everything right here and now. As soon as he swung, struck with all his strength, causing everything in the vicinity to start collapsing. But the notification system began to show Suho that a skill was being created due to the connection with the Fang descendant. Right now, he had linked his strength together with the Fang's strength. This bonding skill is a level 1 beast transformation, consuming 1 mana per second. The Fang descendant is instilled into his body, strengthening his body and developing beast-like senses. Suho couldn't realize if he had absorbed the descendant this time. His body became light and very strong. He felt his senses sharpened. Everything became so unfamiliar and incomprehensible. It helped him move better, avoiding dangers. As soon as he dodged all the attacks, he kicked the monster with all his strength. The one couldn't understand where he got such strength from and why he was losing right now. After all, if you look closely, this is the same kid who fought him a few minutes ago. He can't lose to some person right now, after all. He had spent a lot of effort to achieve and obtain the power he has. Bear, who was watching the battle, realized that the magical power had now jumped up a lot. The beast began to shout that he had no idea what kind of trick he was using, but there was no way he would lose to a human. After all, strength defines the difference between species. He should blame himself for being an inferior being called a human. At this moment, Suho began to use a skill and learn the skill of hand-to-hand combat. BR, who was nearby, was angered that this beast was discussing the difference between species in the presence of a young lord. After all, there's no one higher than a Shadow Lord, and that means he's wrong. He's about to be finished now. As soon as the beast heard these words, it couldn't realize if this kid was really a Shadow Lord. At that moment, Suho jumped back and delivered a perfect and precise punch, which knocked his opponent into the ground. He still did not die and only continued to say that he had to become stronger. That's all he was interested in, just getting stronger. At last he saw the silhouette of his master Raken. He was angry at himself for not being able to protect him.